Please visit my Amazon author page and learn more on the topics of law, hypnotism, and self-improvement.
Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, it's both kind of fascinating and unsettling at the same time. We're talking about pseudo-law in America. So basically, these are, like bogus legal theories and practices that kind of spread like wildfire, especially online, promising all these like easy ways to get out of paying taxes or even like declaring yourself totally independent from like the whole legal system. It's crazy to think that it's become like this surprisingly profitable industry with some folks actually making a living off of like peddling these like totally misleading ideas to people who are, like maybe looking for ways to sidestep the law.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing phenomenon for sure. And it's definitely more widespread than a lot of people realize. My background's in understanding legal systems and the dangers of misinformation in those systems is
Yeah.
it's pretty significant.
Yeah, definitely so. Well, we've got some really interesting material to kind of like dig into this today. We've got excerpts from a book by Joseph Sapp. It's called Navigating the Perils of Pseudolaw in America. And that's going to be like our main guide for this deep dive. And we've also got a few like articles and stuff that go into some specific pseudolaw theories and how they've kind of spread online. One thing that really blew me away when I was like looking through this stuff was that Sapp actually traces this whole pseudolaw thing back to like the early 20th century. I kind of thought it was like a more recent thing that popped up on the internet.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. You can see like these threads of thought popping up. Even back then, in those early tax protest movements, there's this idea of like individual sovereignty that gets taken to like this extreme level, almost like a complete rejection of any kind of like collective responsibility.
So it's like this kind of like anti-establishment undercurrent that's been bubbling away for decades. But the thing that I think is really concerning is like how these theories are getting like turbocharged by the internet now.
Exactly.
Yes.
It creates these echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where these ideas can just like bounce around and they start to seem like way more credible than they actually are.
Right. It's like, you're only hearing from people who already agree with you. So you never get that like reality check.
Exactly.
Like take the straw man theory, for example. This one really had me scratching my head. It claims that there's this like separate legal entity created when you're born, like a shadow version of yourself or something, that's responsible for all your like debts and legal obligations. And so the idea is if you can somehow disassociate yourself from this straw man, then you're like free and clear. Like no more taxes, no more legal troubles. It sounds kind of tempting, right?
Yeah, it's definitely got that like surface appeal. But legally speaking, it's just complete nonsense. It's based on this like fundamental misunderstanding of what a legal entity even is. There's no like separate you that the government's interacting with. You and your legal identity are one and the same. Like the courts have rejected this idea time and time again, but it just keeps popping up in these like online communities.
Okay, so no escaping responsibility through some like legal loophole. But this whole straw man thing, it seems kind of connected to the sovereign citizen movement, right? Like it's that same kind of desire to just declare yourself outside the reach of the law?
Absolutely. That's like a core belief for sovereign citizens.
Yeah.
They think they can just opt out of any legal obligations.
And I guess they use that straw man theory as like justification for that.
Oh, yeah, all the time. But just like with the straw man itself, that idea that you can just declare yourself independent from the law, it has absolutely no legal basis in the United States.
Okay, but what about the people who really believe this stuff? I mean, it's one thing to like understand the legal flaws, but how do you address the emotional appeal? Because it's like they're being sold this fantasy of like freedom and control.
You've hit on a really crucial point there. Pseudo-law often targets people who are already disillusioned or distrustful of authority. And it offers them these like seemingly simple solutions, really complex problems. It gives them a sense of power and a system that they feel is like rigged against them.
So it's almost like a coping mechanism.
In a way, yeah. It can be a way to like process those feelings of powerlessness or frustration. And for some people, it can even give them like a sense of community and belonging, especially online, where these ideas are constantly being reinforced.
That makes sense. So how do we bridge that gap then? Like how do we address those emotional needs while also debunking the harmful misinformation?
Well, that's where critical thinking becomes absolutely crucial. We need to help people develop the skills to like evaluate information, especially online. It's about asking questions, examining sources, and considering different perspectives.
Like teaching people to be their own fact checkers.
Exactly.
So like if something sounds too good to be true.
It probably is.
Right. And don't take legal advice from some random YouTube video or an internet forum.
Definitely not.
So where should people turn for, like, reliable legal information?
Stick to reputable sources. Things like government websites, legal aid organizations, bar associations, credible news outlets that specialize in legal matters. Those are the sources that are grounded in actual law, not just fantasy.
Gotcha. Now, let's say you're talking to, like, a friend or a family member who's starting to get into these pseudo-law theories. How do you even approach that conversation? I mean, it's got to be a delicate situation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Approaching those conversations with empathy and respect is really important. Remember, they might be feeling vulnerable or disillusioned.
Yeah.
And these theories offer them, like, a false sense of control.
So don't just, like, lecture them about how wrong they are.
Definitely not. Instead, try asking open-ended questions. Encourage them to think critically about the information they're consuming.
Like, hey, where did you hear that? Or what evidence supports that claim?
Exactly. You want to try to gently guide them towards questioning their sources and seeking out evidence-based information.
So it's less about, like, winning an argument and more about, like, planting seeds of doubt, encouraging them to, like, reevaluate their beliefs.
People are way more likely to change their minds when they feel like they've reached the conclusion themselves,
Right.
rather than being told what to think.
That's a good point. But what if someone's already, like, deeply entrenched in pseudo-law, maybe even taking actions that could, like, harm themselves or others?
That's when it becomes really important to involve professionals. If you believe someone is in immediate danger, definitely contact law enforcement. But if it's more of a gradual descent,
Yeah.
you might want to reach out to a mental health professional or a counselor who specializes in cult deprogramming or extremist ideologies.
So it's about knowing when to seek outside help, recognizing that we can't always handle these situations alone.
Exactly.
Sometimes professional intervention is necessary.
To break through those deeply held beliefs.
Right, but we can all play a role in preventing people from reaching that point.
Absolutely.
It's about education awareness
Yeah.
and early intervention, and it
Ultimately.
goes beyond just, like, individual actions too, right?
Right. We need to address the broader societal factors that make pseudo-law so appealing in the first place.
Okay, so what are we talking about there?
Things like economic inequality,
Yeah.
distrust in institutions, lack of access to legal resources. When people feel like the system is rigged against them, they're more likely to seek out alternative solutions, even if those solutions are based on fantasy.
Right, it's like a vicious cycle. The more people feel, like, marginalized and disempowered, the more susceptible they become to these, like, fringe theories that promise quick fixes and easy answers.
Exactly.
And that's where systemic change comes in.
Right.
We need to address those underlying inequalities and build a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected. So we're talking about strengthening institutions, promoting civic engagement, and ensuring that everyone has access to justice, regardless of their background or circumstances.
Exactly. We need to create a system that works for everyone, not just a select few.
That's the best way to combat the allure of pseudo-law. You know, we've talked a lot about, like, the dangers of the internet in spreading misinformation, but the internet can also be, like, a powerful tool for combating pseudo-law, right?
Oh, absolutely. We can use online platforms to share accurate information, debunk myths, and connect people with reliable resources.
It's like using the same tools that spread misinformation to fight back with facts and evidence.
Exactly.
And that's where everyone can play a role.
Right.
Share articles from reputable sources, fact-check claims you see online, and engage in respectful dialogue with those who may be spreading or falling for pseudo-law.
Exactly. It's about creating a counter-narrative, a wave of truth and critical thinking that can drown out the noise of misinformation.
I like that. Reclaiming the digital space for reason and evidence-based discourse.
I got
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the individual to the societal, from the practical to the philosophical. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear about some real-life examples of how pseudo-law has played out in the courts. It helps to, like, see how these theories crash and burn when they collide with reality.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've got some fascinating cases that illustrate just how ineffective and sometimes dangerous these theories can be in practice.
Perfect. Let's dive into those after a quick break. Listeners, stick with us for the final part of our pseudo-law deep dive, where we'll explore some real-world case studies and leave you with some final thoughts and resources to continue your exploration of this important topic. We're back, and before the break, we were talking about that whole redemption theory thing and how these pseudo-law schemes can really prey on vulnerable people. But it goes beyond just personal consequences, though, right? The sources we looked at also mentioned like broader societal impacts, too.
Yeah, absolutely. When people start believing they can just like cherry pick which laws they want to follow, it really undermines the whole foundation of a functioning society.
Yeah, it's like everyone becomes a law unto themselves,
Right.
total chaos. But the sources also highlighted a danger I thought was even more chilling,
Oh, yeah.
the potential for violence.
Right. But unfortunately, when people get really deep into these pseudo-law ideologies, especially the ones that emphasize like government conspiracies and stuff, it can create this really dangerous disconnect from reality. And they might start to feel like they're justified in taking extreme measures, even resorting to violence to defend what they perceive as their rights.
Yeah. I remember reading about cases where people claiming to be sovereign citizens ended up in like armed standoffs with law enforcement.
Oh, yeah.
It's a scary reminder that these beliefs aren't just wacky theories. They can have really serious real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And it's not just physical violence either. Pseudo-law can also lead to financial ruin, social isolation, even legal repercussions for people who actually try to act on this misguided advice.
So what can we do about it? How do we combat the spread of misinformation and protect ourselves and others from falling down this pseudo-law rabbit hole?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to be aware of the problem. That's why I think these kinds of deep dives are so important. You got to understand the enemy to defeat it, right?
Right. Knowledge is power, but awareness alone isn't enough. What are some like practical steps we can take?
One crucial strategy is to arm yourself with accurate information. Like if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Don't take legal advice from random YouTube videos or internet forums.
Yeah, that's a really good rule of thumb in general.
Right.
So where should people go for reliable legal information?
Stick to reputable sources, like government websites, legal aid organizations, bar associations, credible news outlets that focus on legal matters. Those are the sources that are grounded in actual law, not fantasy.
Okay, so those are good resources to check out. But what about if you're talking to like a friend or family member who's starting to like dabble in these pseudo-law theories? How do you even approach a conversation like that? It seems like it would be pretty delicate.
Oh, yeah, it definitely can be. It's important to approach those conversations with empathy and respect. Remember, the person might be feeling vulnerable or disillusioned, and these theories are offering them this false sense of control.
Right, so avoid the temptation to just like lecture them about how wrong they are.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, try asking open-ended questions. Encourage them to think critically about the information they're consuming.
Like, hey, where did you hear that? Or what evidence supports that claim?
Exactly. You want to gently guide them towards questioning their sources and looking for evidence-based information.
So it's less about winning an argument and more about like planting seeds of doubt,
Right.
encouraging them to reevaluate their beliefs on their own.
Exactly. People are way more likely to change their minds when they feel like they've come to that conclusion themselves, rather than being told what to think.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what if someone's already like way deep into pseudo-law, maybe even taking actions that could harm themselves or others? What do you do then?
That's when it's really important to get professionals involved. If you think someone's in immediate danger, definitely contact law enforcement.
Right.
But it's more of a gradual thing. You might want to reach out to a mental health professional or a counselor who specializes in things like cult deprogramming or extremist ideologies.
Okay, so it's about knowing when to seek outside help, recognizing that we can't always handle these situations on our own.
Right.
Sometimes professional intervention is necessary to break through those really deep-seated beliefs.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes it is.
But, we can all play a role in
Yeah.
trying to prevent people from getting to that point.
Absolutely.
It's about education awareness and early intervention.
Exactly.
And, it goes beyond just individual actions too, right?
Oh, definitely.
Right.
We need to address those broader societal factors that make pseudo-law so appealing to people in the first place.
So what are we talking about there?
Things like economic inequality, distrust in institutions, lack of access to legal resources. When people feel like the system is rigged against them, they're going to be more likely to look for other solutions, even if those solutions are based on fantasy.
Yeah, it's like that vicious cycle we were talking about earlier. The more marginalized and disempowered people feel, the more susceptible they become to those fringe theories. And those theories offer these like quick fixes and easy answers.
Right, and that's where systemic change has to come in.
So we need to address those underlying inequalities and try to build a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected.
Exactly.
We need to create a system that works for everyone, not just a select few.
Absolutely.
And that's really the best way to combat the allure of pseudo-law.
I think so.
You know, we've talked a lot about the dangers of the internet and spreading misinformation, but the internet can also be a really powerful tool for fighting back against pseudo-law too, right?
Oh, for sure. We can use online platforms to share accurate information, debunk those myths, and connect people with reliable resources.
It's like using those same tools that are spreading the misinformation
Yeah,
to fight back with facts and evidence.
Exactly.
And that's something we can all do.
Absolutely.
Share articles from reputable sources, fact-check those claims you see online,
yeah.
and engage in respectful dialogue with people who might be spreading or falling for pseudo-law.
It's about creating that counter-narrative, a
Oh,
wave of truth and critical thinking to drown out all that noise and misinformation.
I love that. Reclaiming the digital space for reason and evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from individual impacts to societal impacts, from practical strategies to like bigger picture ideas. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear about some real life examples of how this whole pseudo-law thing actually plays out in the courts. I think it's helpful to see how those theories actually crash and burn when they collide with reality.
You're right, it is helpful. And I've got some fascinating cases to share that really highlight that clash between pseudo-law fantasies and legal realities.
Perfect. Well, let's dive into those then. What kind of scenarios have you seen?
Mm.
All right, so we're back. And, you know, after all this talk about theories and societal impacts, I'm really curious to hear about some of those real-life examples. Like, how does all this pseudo-law stuff actually play out in court cases?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about the theories in the abstract, but it's really eye-opening to see what happens when people actually try to use these arguments in a legal setting.
Exactly. So what kind of scenarios have you seen?
Well, let's start with the straw man theory we talked about earlier. You know, the idea that you can separate yourself from your legal obligations by claiming there's this separate straw man entity that's responsible for all your debts and legal issues.
Yeah, that one still kind of boggles my mind. So have people actually tried to use that in court?
Oh, absolutely. I remember one case where a guy was facing a pretty hefty tax bill, and he tried to argue that he wasn't actually liable for the taxes because he had renounced his straw man.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, dead serious. He even filed all these like convoluted legal documents that he'd found online, claiming that he had severed all ties with his alleged alter ego.
So he basically thought he could just like declare himself tax exempt by saying, nope, not me. That's the straw man's problem. And I'm guessing the judge didn't buy it.
Not for a second. The judge patiently explained to the guy that the straw man theory has absolutely no legal basis whatsoever.
Well, so much for that loophole. What about the whole sovereign citizen thing? Have you seen cases where people have tried to use that in court?
Oh, countless times. And it usually doesn't end well for them. There was one case I remember involving a woman who refused to pay property taxes. She claimed she was a sovereign citizen and therefore not subject to any government jurisdiction.
I bet that didn't go over too well with the local authorities.
Nope. She ended up losing her home to foreclosure. The court ruled that her sovereign citizen claims had absolutely no legal weight.
So even though she really believed in that ideology?
Yeah, her beliefs didn't exempt her from the law.
Ouch. It's a tough lesson to learn, that your personal beliefs don't override the actual law.
Definitely.
Okay, what about that redemption theory? Have you seen cases where people have tried to use that?
Oh yeah, redemption theory is a classic. Especially in financial disputes, people try to use it to get out of paying debts, taxes, mortgages, you name it. The usual tactic is to file all these really complex documents filled with legal jargon, and they claim they've redeemed themselves from their financial obligations by accessing those secret government accounts they believe exist.
So it's like a financial magic trick. They try to make their debts disappear with a bunch of paperwork.
Exactly. But the trick only works in their minds. Courts have consistently rejected those redemption theory arguments. They say they're frivolous and completely lacking any legal merit.
It's like trying to pay your bills with monopoly money. Well, these cases are definitely fascinating, but also kind of disheartening. It seems like pseudo-law can have some pretty serious consequences, not just for the individuals who get caught up in it, but for the legal system as a whole.
Yet you're absolutely right. It's not just about the harm to individuals. Pseudo-law also undermines the integrity of the legal system, and it erodes public trust in legitimate institutions.
So what's the takeaway here? What do you hope people will get out of this deep dive into pseudo-law?
Well, I hope they've learned about the dangers of these theories and how they can impact individuals and society as a whole. But beyond that,
I really want people to feel empowered, to be critical thinkers, to question information they encounter,
Yeah.
and to seek out reliable sources.
It's about being a savvy consumer of information, not just taking everything you see online at face value.
Exactly. And remember, there's no shame in seeking help if you're struggling with legal issues or if someone you know has gotten caught up in pseudo-law. There are resources out there, legal aid organizations, mental health professionals. They can provide guidance and support.
It's a good reminder that we don't have to face these challenges alone.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a really enlightening deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of our Notebook Deep Dive podcast. Please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share what you have learned with others.